soon as the host or the director says, we'll fix it in post, the whole crew goes,
We
no.
ready?
Yeah, it should be going live.
Welcome everybody to live Q&A. This is Pastor and the Recovering Heretic from a different location.
Live on location
Right.
in the media loft.
In the media loft. So hi Dan.
Hi, Dave. How are
I
you?
feel like we're both taller and closer together than we usually are.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's kind of unsettling.
It is, a
I'm
little
not
bit.
used to this height.
Yeah, but that's okay. That's okay. It's like I see sets of the Muppet Show, and like the whole thing's built on obviously like stilts.
Yeah.
Like everybody's walking beneath. It's like that.
I love it.
So, all right, where were we?
We were talking about El Papo, talking about the Pope last time, and last time we basically got the history of how the Pope came to be.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
the real history, not the.
Yeah. Right.
And so, to recap that, a lot of it boils down to the fact that you had the Eastern and Western Roman Empire.
Right.
And the East, it was mainly philosophers. More of the actual apostles had gone and preached in the East. So you had that direct apostolic succession.
Yeah.
Whereas the West, it was just Peter and Rome.
Yeah.
And so the whole western half of the empire just had that one bishop
Right. Right.
to rule overall.
Right. Or at least to trace, didn't start as ruling, but trace apostolic succession
Yeah.
through. Yes.
So we ended up, now we just perceive the one pope. But that's how it kind of.
Yeah.
But he had been first among equals because it was only the Western Pope. The Eastern popes would have the Western Pope kind of come in as an arbiter to help
Right.
with disputes and,
Right.
and all that. And then on top of that, the fact that the Roman Catholic Church today is so rule-oriented evolved out of the fact that the Western Roman Empire was still run by lawyers
Yeah.
and the Eastern was by philosophers.
Right.
So
Yes.
I think that recaps
That's
the gist
broadly
of
it. Yeah. Yes.
So today, today we get salacious.
Okay.
Let's get mired in controversy.
Okay.
And specifically, we'll broaden out from there, both earlier in history and later. But let's start with the papacy during the Reformation. And so what was the role of the Pope in causing the Reformation in the first place? You know, why do we not have the one church with a capital C?
Yeah.
We have all these Christian denominations.
Yeah.
So what went on with the papacy then that Martin Luther objected to so much, and it created the schism?
Okay.
So this may be an entire episode in itself, I see.
Well, there have been various people arguing there needed to be reforms for a while. Before Luther, there was a guy named Jan Hus, who was Bohemian, who basically had Luther's reform program, justification by faith. People deserve to take communion in what was called both kinds, both the wine and the bread,
Oh, so originally the regular people only had the bread? They didn't have the wine as well?
They didn't have the wine.
was only
For
the
fear of
priests?
spilling it. If it's literally Jesus, you're spilling Jesus, and that seemed like a very bad offense.
Yeah.
So it actually started as a piety thing individual people would do on their own. This is actually how most rules started in the Catholic Church. They started as piety things people would do on their own, and then they got universalized to everybody.
Yeah.
So you would get, only taking the wine or only taking the bread was this, well, I don't want to spill Jesus, so I'll just pass, Father. Thank you very much. And then it became, after 200, 300 years of people doing that, it became this rule that everybody,
Gotcha.
That's actually how a lot of things get started in the Catholic Church. So basically he had Luther's reform program. The one thing he didn't have was the printing press. So
Huss didn't have
yeah,
it.
Huss, right. So it was fairly easy. The printing press hadn't been invented yet. It's about 50 years before Luther.
Okay.
Printing press doesn't exist yet. So it was fairly easy for when the Pope banned his works and declared him a heretic and then he got executed.
Oh, wow. Okay.
You know, it was
Burned
fairly.
at the stake execution?
Yeah, I forget what it was. I forget what it was. But it was fairly easy to hunt him down and burn his works. You know, they were self-contained. They were. You know,
you go to his study and all his works were right there. So.
Right, and you know, you had to hand copy anything if you wanted to. You know, there was no printing press.
Yeah.
So like, okay, fairly simple.
Now, was Huss actually, was he a priest? Did he have some kind of background to base?
Totally forget what. I think he was a priest, but don't quote me on that because I totally forget what he is. Anyway, so the Reformation gets kicked off because St. Peter's Basilica, the thing we have there now.
Yeah.
There was a building there before that. It's called Old St. Peter's Basilica. It was actually built by Constantine.
Oh, wow.
You know, and
So
it was
over 1,000 years old at that point.
Yeah, it was really old. And it was falling apart because it was
Really old.
really old. And so the Pope at the time has this guy he knows by the name of Michelangelo.
I know a guy.
Yeah, right. You know, this wonder kid, all around architect. You know,
Architect, sculptor, painter,
right?
Yeah.
You know, and all other people too, right? I mean, he's not the only one, but as other people, right? You know, other artists, and it's the Renaissance, and the popes at this time are major sponsors of the Renaissance. They use the wealth of the Catholic Church to sponsor these artists and all these things. You know, which is why all those Renaissance paintings are so often
very religious.
in their themes. It's because frequently it was the church sponsoring them, you know.
Okay.
All well and good. So he decides he needs a new building because the old St. Peter's Basilica, which is still the beating heart of the Catholic Church, Peter's buried underneath it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the Pope should have a grander thing, right? Especially since at this time other major cathedrals are coming online, right? You know, and so, you know, you start getting these other archbishoprics that have better places
Than the Pope. Yeah.
Right? This doesn't seem proper. So he takes a loan out from
The Medicis, I would guess.
I can't remember if it's the Medicis or the Frugers. It's one of the two. I think it's the Frugers. But one of the major banking clans takes a loan out. Right.
For this massive building.
For this massive, I mean, look at it today. It's a, you know, country. It's a small country, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's a gigantic building, right? You know. Okay. Beautiful building, you know. But then you got the problem. You got this major loan. How do you pay off the interest? Right?
Yeah.
And so what the Pope issues is he issues what's called a plenary indulgence. In Catholic dogma, they still actually believe this. They just don't sell it anymore because it seems bad to do. You know, but in a plenary indulgence is your time in purgatory is, and it's very clear about this. It's your time in purgatory is the actual belief.
So you can't buy your way out of hell.
Right. And anybody in purgatory is destined for heaven. That's the other thing you got to understand, right? Like, purgatory is not this, you might go up, you might go down. Purgatory is like, you're on your way up, you just need...
A little purification.
You need a little purification first, right? Because in Catholic dogma, there's a distinction philosophically between what would be called the eternal penalty of sin and the temporal penalty, right? You know, so if I smack you in the face, which I'm not going to do, but if I were to take my fist and just hit you, right? There's
like X with Elon.
Yeah, right. You know, there's an eternal penalty, right? I have wounded my brother in Christ, you know, and for that there's an eternal penalty of sin, right? But there's also a temporal penalty, which is usually meted out by the law, right? You file assault charges again, you know.
Yeah.
Right, you know. In Catholic dogma, purgatory is for working off the temporal penalty of sin, right? You know, you haven't done what you needed to do. Anything you haven't done that you needed to do to work off that temporal penalty, whether it was ask your brother for forgiveness or do the Hail Marys or whatever,
How does that play into last rites then? Because theoretically, don't last rites absolve you of all that right before you die?
Last rites are like a final absolution of all eternal sin you could possibly have committed.
Okay.
It's like just to make sure you're clear to go. Your
Yeah.
boarding pass is ready. This is what we're doing.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So,
But you still have a little bit of this other stuff to.
well, there's still, there's this temporal side of things, right?
Yeah.
Like you might be forgiven eternally, but you didn't, in the punch in the face, you didn't.
Yeah, I didn't do the temporal.
You didn't do the temporal side thing to earn that, so that's what purgatory.
In Dickens's terms from A Christmas Carol, you still have those links in the chain.
Right, exactly,
Okay.
right. And so purgatory is for unbinding those links kind of gradually.
Gotcha.
Okay, so the Pope can issue what's called a plenary indulgence, which is you receive a certain amount of forgiveness off that time period for you or for a loved one, based on, having doing this thing that the Pope says.
Yeah.
So
to be clear, too, this is like all similar to when Mormons can say they can baptize your ancestors. You can get a plenary indulgence for one of your loved ones who's already passed on.
Yes.
Okay.
Catholics have a much less understanding of. Catholics don't believe in a hard distinction between the living and the dead.
Okay.
So it's perfectly normal to for churches to pray for the dead. Back in the Reformation, this got a little out of control, but it was a particularly rich person who'd done a lot of bad things would endow an entire monastery to say masses
On
their behalf, so to help him work off that. Again, that temporal penalty.
Yeah.
He's a baptized Christian who's gone to confession, hopefully. So his eternal penalty is fine, but he's still done a lot of really bad things. He's got this temporal penalty, and he's
Yeah.
I'll pay 100 monks to say Mass for me every 2 days or
Yeah.
something like that, and that'll
work it off real fast.
work it off real fast. Right,
So where does the Pope come in on this? So the Pope.
the Pope can do this. It's called a plenary indulgence. It could be like there's a special door that still exists that if you walk through this door, you've received, this plenary indulgence grace,
And it'll cost you $50 to walk through the door.
Well, in this case, no. It's just whoever that's a pilgrimage thing. So it's just
okay,
whoever
okay.
makes it there. In this case, what Pope Leo X did, is he issued a plenary indulgence to be sold in Germany.
Oh, just in Germany?
Yeah, well, mostly in Germany.
Okay.
Yeah, mostly in the Holy Roman Empire. So Germany, Northern Italy, mostly in Germany, though.
Okay.
Germany, Bohemia, Czech Republic, that area.
Yeah. Still very Germanic, though.
Right. To be sold. Right. And out of the theory that I'm the Pope, it's called the Treasury of Merit. The saints have built up this storehouse of good works that as Pope I have the ability to dispense with as I please for God's people, right? And he
So
did
the
this,
saint's goodwill is like this bank account he sees.
literally, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, and again, this is all to pay off this interest he has. Literally, St. Peter's Basilica started the Reformation, all right? Because the Pope then outsourced this job to the Dominicans, which are an order within the Catholic Church.
Okay.
Still, they're a preaching order. They're very good at preaching, giving speeches. It's their job.
Okay. Hence their OPE title.
Yeah.
Order of Preaching, whatever.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why they were founded. They were founded to be preachers.
Okay.
Founded to give speeches.
But he's switching them over to be salespeople to sell these plenary
Well, they can give
indulgences.
good speeches, right?
So that's the advertising.
Right,
Okay.
and so there's a particular salesman by the name of John Tetzel who is less than scrupulous about his salesman job, right? He doesn't just say this will get you out of purgatory. He says things like this will get you out of hell,
So he's going beyond the Pope.
He's going actually beyond the doctrine, right?
Way overselling this.
He actually had
Okay.
this line where he goes, I could violate the Virgin Mary herself. He actually said this publicly. And if I had one of these letters, I'd be welcome into the gates of heaven, right?
Wow.
That's his opening pitch, right? You know.
Whoa.
So yeah. So anyway, yada yada yada. Luther encounters this guy. How this sets off the Reformation. Luther encounters this guy as he wanders through Wittenberg.
Okay, so Luther directly encounters Tetzel.
Yeah, basically.
Tete-a-tete
right, or he meets, or I think it's that he keeps getting congregants who are like,
hey, look what
Pastor, I
got."
just bought this thing. And
Yeah.
he's like, it's useless. You know, like you just wasted all your hard-earned money, you know, and you're a peasant, so you don't have a lot on this, you know. So Luther's an Augustinian monk, right?
Different order,
Different order.
and they sound more intellectual.
They are, and different theological tradition, right? Like the Dominicans, St. Thomas Aquinas is Dominican,
Yeah.
you know, and so the Dominicans are more into natural law, you know, more into philosophy. The Augustinians are, right, like Augustine's actually pretty close to Luther in many ways, you know, so it's not surprising an Augustinian monk started the Lutheran Reformation.
Yeah.
You know, and so then he nails the he nails the 95 Theses to the door. The 95 Theses are meant as a challenge to be arbitrated by the local archbishop between the Augustinian and Dominican orders. That's how Luther intends it.
So it was supposed to be
It's not supposed to
an
be
inter-order
it was-
debate.
right.
Dominicans versus Augustinians in this
Right.
corner.
Right. And
Martin
that-
Luther.
Right. And Luther's supposed to be. This debate never happened, by the way, because everything spun out of control so fast. But it was supposed. What Luther was intending was not to kick off the Reformation, but was intending to get a debate. It's like, you Dominicans are saying this. I think your theology is wrong. Here are my 95 clearly bullet-pointed reasons why I think what you're saying is wrong. You know, and if you read through the 95 Theses, it's pretty boring because he's going over literally 95 points of here's why what you've said doesn't work.
It
You
gets
know,
pretty obtuse at points.
right?
Yeah.
Like my favorite line is in the middle of it. He's like, if the Pope could, you know, has the ability to, you know, release all souls from purgatory, why doesn't he just do it out of Christian charity?
Yeah.
You know, like there's things like that.
Yeah,
right.
if I'm really concerned about everyone's salvation, let me just
Right. Why doesn't
exercise this power.
Right. Why doesn't he just do this?
Yeah.
You know. Okay. So yeah. So that's how we get the Reformation. Is the Pope does that. Leo X then, through a variety of things, excommunicates Luther.
Okay,
This
so
is-
we're 4 Leos back where this is happening.
Yes, this is Leo X, not the 14th. Right. Leo's got kind of a mixed bag for Lutherans. You know, there's Leo the Great, who prevented Attila the Hun from sacking the city of Rome, which is great. You know,
Yeah.
good job. Then there's Leo X, who excommunicated Luther. You know, so
Well, and so how is this happening then? How is he? Does Leo give Luther a shot to defend himself first, or
Sort
is
of.
it kind of like Joan of Arc, where it's just like you just recant? We're not going to really hear
well,
you.
that's what it's meant as. It's meant as you're supposed to just recant. It's a shot, but it's meant as. So like early on in this process, Luther's own confessor and head of his local Augustinian order actually expels him from the order so that he doesn't have to arrest him. You know, that's why he gets expelled.
So he actually expels him as a favor.
Right. It's I've got to expel you or else I'd be under church edict, you know, to
Yeah.
hand you over to the authorities. But if you're not under my authority, I don't have to do that. So, you know, this is what the Diet of Worms is. So at the same time as this is going on, there's this jurisdiction battle going on between the Holy Roman Emperor and the Pope over who's really in charge of world Christianity. You know, the Holy Roman Emperor wants to say it's him, and the Holy Roman Emperor at this time is Charles V. Charles V is the closest we've ever gotten to actual king of the planet.
Wow.
You know, he is Holy Roman Emperor, King of Austria, Hungary, Bohemia, ruler of the Netherlands, and King of Spain.
Wow. Okay.
So including all of Spain's colonies in the New World in 1520, you know, so like the entire New World. So like he's all of these things all at once. You know,
Yeah.
like he actually is about as close to Emperor of the planet. You know, again, all of Spain's colonies.
Yeah.
Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, which is Germany and Italy. You know,
Yeah.
like
He's actually
Austria,
got multiple
Hungary.
continents he's in
Right,
charge.
he's actually
Yeah.
got multiple continents. You know, it's hard to. Anyway. So there's this jurisdiction battle, which has been going on between the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor for centuries at this point, over who's actually in charge of world Christianity. The emperors want to say it's them. You know, the popes always say it's me. Pope usually ends up on top in this battle. Like there have been a couple Holy Roman emperors who've just been excommunicated.
Wow.
You know, but
This is a lot more layered than I thought.
yeah. So there's this jurisdiction battle. Luther's German, right?
Yeah.
And so he has the rights of a German citizen, which means he has the rights of an imperial citizen under the empire.
Yeah.
Right? On top of that, he's not just German, but he's Saxon. The Prince of Saxony is one of the elector. The Holy Roman Emperor was elected by 7 people. And Saxony is one of the electors. The Prince of Saxony, it's actually one of the 7 people that choose the emperor. So, like, this is a really powerful guy, and he really his prince really likes Luther. So he's inclined to tell the emperor and the pope, go to hell. I'm not arresting him. Partially because he makes me too much money at my local university I just founded. Because the prince had just set up a university in Wittenberg, brand new, and universities were new at this point. So he's like, I just put this new university. I've got this rock star professor named Martin Luther. No way in hell am I arresting this guy.
Yeah.
You
He's
know?
bringing me students and revenue.
Right,
and, yeah.
right. Like, no way in hell am I arresting this guy. This all gets wrapped up eventually in what we call the Diet of Worms, which the Diet was the imperial legislature with the emperor presiding.
Okay.
And it moved around every session. So in Diet of Worms, it was meeting in
The Diet
the
was
Germans,
going to be there.
It was meeting in the German city of Worms.
Yeah.
You know. And at that, the papal legate, who's the official representative of the Pope, says you have to recant, right? And this is where you get the famous, unless I'm convinced, because Luther tries to make the argument, then the papal legate's like, shut up, it's either recant or no.
Wow.
You
So
know?
they don't even listen to his argument.
Yeah,
really.
and
Okay.
that's when you get the famous, unless I'm convinced by conscience or by clear reason, you know, that what I've said is wrong. I can either go against conscience, you know, for popes have contradicted themselves, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
You know, here I stand, I can do no other. God help me. You know, and he says, God help me, because they did the same thing, the Pope and the Emperor, with Jan Hus 50 years earlier. And he was then, even though he was promised safe passage to the Diet, they revoked it the minute he said it and then executed him. You know, and so Luther is scared to death when he goes to this thing, like, I know how this ends. The emperor gave me safe passage as an imperial citizen to the Diet, but I know he's going to revoke it, and then the Pope's men are going to arrest me, and I'm going to die. That doesn't happen simply because the Prince of Saxony kidnaps Luther in the middle of the night.
Wow.
Hides him in a little castle somewhere. And this is where Luther translates the Bible and stuff like that, because he's got nothing else to do other than hide out in this castle
Yeah.
for months on end, because everybody in Central Europe's searching for him, but Prince of Saxony stuck him in a spare castle. And
Wow. Okay.
anyway, that's the extended pilot. That gets us up to about 1520.
Okay. So, is the Reformation going on with Luther poking, or is it starting on its own while he's in hiding? It's just word is spreading.
Oh,
and people
I
are-
mean, at that point, it's out of control, right? It's, it's a full-blown church Reformation movement at that point, you know, and Leo dies somewhere in there, and there's other popes, you know, that aren't so great, you know.
So does the Pope after Leo
I forget what the
feel
pope...
any, like, hey, this Luther guy had a point?
No, none of them feel that way at all. They have much later, they finally get what's called the Council of Trent. But all that does is, makes a couple of very superficial reforms, like kind of sort of authorizes maybe sometimes on Tuesdays the laity can have communion in both kind, you know, like, but like doesn't really address any of the underlying. It just reaffirms papal authority.
Yeah.
And this is out of that council starts coming eventually much later. In the 1800s, you start flowing from that council. You get another council that affirms the doctrine of papal infallibility, you know, but it's kind of started at Trent where, you know, and this is the council Luther's been wanting all along, and they didn't even invite the Lutherans, you know, and they just kind of had it. They just affirmed their own authority, basically, at that point.
So what was, if Luther wasn't actively leading the Reformation, what was the fire underneath it that was keeping it going?
Well, I mean, he was leading it in a certain way, right? I mean, he was making speeches. He's writing at this. I mean, the amount of stuff he is writing. We still haven't translated everything Luther wrote to this day. That's how much he wrote.
Yeah.
Like, he just wrote and wrote and wrote. And so he wrote letters. He wrote reform pieces. He wrote, you know, some of the greatest works of Luther come out of this period. He translated the whole Bible in this period, kind of along the way standardizing the German language, you know, because up to this point it hadn't been standardized.
Yeah.
And, you know, his translation of the Bible, like, basically standardized the German language, you know, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So,
fascinating.
writes a mass, you know, I mean, right, like, comes up with the first order of worship, all that stuff, you know, is in this period.
Well, we're already out of time.
Yes, sir.
Except we have a question. Go ahead.
No, let's go. It's okay.
No.
How much works of Luther actually survived World
How-
War II?
How many works of Luther survived World War II?
Oh, I mean, a lot. I have 53 volumes of Luther's works on my shelf. Yeah.
Whoa. Okay.
Right. So,
Have you read them all?
no, because that would be insane. You know, I pull out pieces that I need here and there, you
Yeah.
know. And I think volume 54 is coming out in a year or something. You know, they release a new volume once in a while. Again, that's how much he wrote. Like,
Yeah.
it's hard to fathom how much this guy put pen to paper.
Yeah.
You know,
Amazing.
so,
But yeah, so we're obviously going to have to do a part 3 now.
yeah.
Because we've just gotten narrow slices so far.
Right, you've kind of gotten to 1526.
Yeah. So next time,
Yeah.
more controversy.
Yeah.
with
Even
the
more
papacy
controversy.
and
Right.
what
yes.
that led to.
Yes.
And as usual, if you have questions, get them to us or get them to Drew, who will ask them right here.
Yep.
And yeah, we'll look forward to exploring more about the papacy.
Peace, folks.
Adios.